Hi everybody, I'm Adrian Allen from Critical Impact Group. I'm a firearms instructor and consultant in Wisconsin. I wanted to do this video for a while now, just talking about how to properly mount up a red dot optic on a pistol so I can send it out to students coming to my class ahead of time. You guys can get everything squared away before you show up in class and we're not wasting a whole bunch of time. But of course, anybody else who comes across this, you're welcome to it as well. Now, I'm sure different people are going to have slightly different takes on this process. My background, I spent several years working for an optics manufacturer, saw how our engineering team and people a lot smarter than I mounted these things up. And also for about the last 2 to 3 years, I have run, probably about 500 law enforcement firearms instructors through my 2-day red dot pistol instructor course. And those instructors have, of course, gone back to their agencies and represent, thousands and thousands of police officers. So over the last few years, I've gotten phone calls and messages and feedback when people had problems and have heard, about what was working and what didn't. Now, mounting these things is probably the #1 source of failure that I see with red dot optics. If you have a good quality pistol mounted optic these days, they're extremely reliable, and I actually see more iron sight failures in my classes than with the optics. However, if you don't mount them properly, you can have problems, and mounting by far is the #1 issue. So let's get at it and walk you through the process. To show you the process, I'm going to be mounting this HoloSun 507C onto this Glock 19 slide. It's a Gen 5 MOS. Different manufacturers will have slightly different setups. The Glock MOS system uses these factory plates, but it's all pretty much the same process. There's a few tools that you're going to need to start. You are going to need an inch-pound torque wrench. This is definitely something you need to have. Don't skimp on it. Don't think you can go finger tight. Buy one of these. This one's from Vortex Optics. This is a pretty good quality one. The Wheeler fat wrench works fine. You don't have to spend a ton of money, but expect to spend $50 to $75 on it. You may want to have just a regular screwdriver as well. It's really not good to use your torque wrench to loosen screws, so it's really just for tightening. In a pinch, it's not a big deal, but you don't want to do it repeatedly. You're obviously going to need the correct size bit. So in this case, both the optic and the plate uses a T10 Torx. You're going to want to inspect the bit to make sure that it's in good shape. If the bit starts getting chewed up, you're going to strip the heads of your screws, and that can be a real pain. You're going to want some type of solvent, which I'll go into here in a minute, and you're going to want some type of thread locker. There are 2 types that you may use. The first one is just a Blue Loctite or Permatex thread locker. The second one, and the one that I actually recommend, is called Vibratite VC-3. I highly recommend the Vibratite VC-3 over the Blue thread locker, and this is why. The Loctite acts as a glue. It glues the threads together. The Vibratite does that, but it also works to dampen the vibrations when you're shooting. So in my experience, again, 500 instructors coming through all of my classes, all of the phone calls I've gotten about optics loosening up on the MOS system, or any system for that matter, has been using Blue Loctite, the medium strength Loctite. I have not run into anyone who's had optics loosened with the VC-3, so long as they're torquing it to spec and allowing it to dry before they go shoot. It's harder to get. You have to buy it online usually. Most local hardware stores don't carry it, but I highly recommend it. On the MOS system, you're going to need the slide, obviously. You're going to have the mounting plate. This is a #2. You're going to have screws for your plate that mount the plate to the slide. You're going to have screws that mount your optic to the plate. And then, of course, you're going to have your optic. Starting the process out, this optic has already been mounted on this gun. However, when you get the new system, the MOS system for sure, and a lot of other ones, and you take them out of the package, most of the time they're covered in some type of grease or oil. So it's a good idea to take some type of solvent, like a rubbing alcohol or something like that. You're just going to want to clean off the plate really good. You're going to want to clean off the screws. You're going to want to clean off the slide, get down into the holes in the slide down there just with a Q-tip or something like that, just to clean everything off. Clean off the screws, make sure everything is good to go. Obviously, glue is not going to stick to oil, so we want to make sure that those are cleaned off. If your screws come with, I don't know if you can see that or not, they have blue Loctite already on them. They came with like a dried Loctite. Those have been degreased. You don't need to degrease those. And you can just put the Vibratite right over them. After everything is degreased, you want to make sure everything dries. The next step, and a lot of people skip this, but it's really important, especially with the MOS system, is you're going to want to check to make sure that the screws that mount the Optic to the plate are the correct length. I'll put a picture up here on your screen and it'll show you what happens when those screws are too long. Now, some systems like the Smith & Wesson M&P, the screws go directly through the plate right down into the slide. So to start that, we're just going to put our Optic on our plate here, and I'm just going to drop these screws in, get them just, barely snug to make sure that they don't stick out too far. You can see the screws inside, they're not sticking out. Basically, I want to make sure the screw does not stick beyond that. If it does, don't use those screws. They're the wrong screws. They're too long for this system. That's good to go. So now what I need to do is I need to mount my plate to the gun. To start with, what I'm going to do, again, I've degreased everything, is I'm going to take a little bit of this Vibratite and I'm going to apply it to my screws here. I want to put it on the screw threads. I don't want to just dump it down. I've seen people dump them down the holes. That is connected to your slide. So those holes, if you dump too much stuff down there, that's going to run in there and cause all sorts of havoc. Whenever I'm working with fine threaded screws like this, I like to back them in until, I don't know if you heard that, it kind of clicked. The screw jumps and now I know I haven't cross-threaded anything. All right, I'm just gonna not even snug that one up. I'm just gonna put it in there and now I'm gonna put this other screw in. Same thing, just a dab of the Vibratite. You don't need a ton, but I like to make sure that the threads are coated here. Just a kind of a light coat. Doesn't need to be dripping off there. You probably don't want it dripping off. There we go. All right, so now those are down there. They're just barely finger tight. I have not torqued them yet. Just like working lug nuts with a car, you don't want to torque one down and then the other. You just want to make sure that it's done evenly. Torque specs are going to depend on the manufacturer. Glock is approximately 13 inch-pounds. So I set my torque wrench 10, 12, 13 inch-pounds there. Again, one tip here. If you think you have the right Torx bit, it's not a bad idea to try one larger. It's happened to me a few times where I thought I grabbed the right one, I started torquing and all of a sudden it slipped and I realized, oops, I had a T9 instead of a T10. So just be really careful with it. And again, make sure your bit is in good shape. So now make sure that's in there firm. I'm just gonna turn it. It's turning quite a bit, so I'm not gonna quite torque it yet. Now both screws are nice and even. Now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna torque until the screwdriver clicks. There we go. I'm going to do it one more time. Now, if you've worked with AR-15s, you've mounted any barrels, you may know the procedure is to torque, untorque, torque, untorque. My understanding is that these screws, they're fine threads. There's not that much torque on them. The threads really aren't going to stretch like you might see at higher torque applications. So I don't bother with that. I just make sure that they're torqued down and now they're good to go. I like to just wipe off if there's any excess VC-3 there, and now the plate is on and good to go. Next thing, now we just have to mount the Optic to the slide. So we're just going to go in there and make sure everything lines up, of course. Optic should sit nice and flat, of course, shouldn't be able to see any daylight through it, at least not with this plate system. And now, same thing here. We're going to install the Optic screws, mounting screws, through the Optic to the plate. Now, if you're running a cross bolt, say a 509T or an aim-point acro, it's really the same concept. You just have one bolt to torque down, again, to manufacturer's specifications. Now, these screws came from the manufacturer with Blue Loctite on them. I'm just going to put this Vibratite right over the top of it. I've never had any problems with that. That's always worked for me. I'm getting it all over my fingers now. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. Again, I'm just going to start the screws here. There we go. A little more Vibratite VC-3. Again, I don't want it dripping, but I just want the threads coated. There we go. All right, I'm going to go back to my torque wrench, and again, I'm going to torque this down to the manufacturer's specifications. The Holosun 507C calls for 15 inch-pounds of torque. 15 is a pretty good number. It's pretty common for optics that have this top-down style mounting. Go with what the manufacturer says. If you over-torque, you risk breaking the screws off. So 15 inch-pounds. Again, I'm just going to kind of snug it up before it clicks. There we go. There we go. And we'll hit it one more time. I'm just going to wipe off any of that extra thread locker that may have kind of seeped out. There's not a lot, just a little bit. Don't want to get that on my window or down in my emitter or anything like that. And there we have it. Our Optic is mounted up. Now, a couple of things I want to mention, however. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to put witness marks on these screws. So here's a paint pen. So I'm just going to take, let's see, can you see? Yeah, I think so. I'm just drawing a little line from the Optic onto the top of the screw head. If my Optic starts loosening, if my screws start slipping, I will notice that that line doesn't line up anymore. Ideally, keep a torque wrench in your bag, so if that happens, you can torque it and you'll be good to go. But again, if you need to, I have found that if you just torque it back to the line, you're gonna be good enough, because maybe those threads do stretch a little bit. If you actually hit it with a torque wrench, you'll usually go a little bit past the line. Just something to be aware of. You can use a solvent to wipe off the old paint mark, let it dry, and then put new paint marks on there. Now, there's one other thing that I kind of skipped over that I wanted to mention, specifically about the Glock MOS system. The MOS system I really have never seen any problems with. Now, some people will disagree with me, and that's fine. The only issue I've seen with the MOS system is the screws, the quality of the screws that mount the plate to the slide. They seem to be really cheap screws. I've seen a lot of them break. When that happens, you have to send your slide back to Glock, and they have to drill them out or extract them somehow, or you need to know a machinist who can do it. So I do recommend replacing the MOS plate to slide mounting screws with some better screws from McMaster Carr. I'll put the part number and a link in the description below. For the most part, the Optic screws that mount to the plates, they're all right. I have seen some break from various manufacturers. For whatever reason, it seems that screws are just a thing that people cheap out on. So, if you have the right length and thread pitch, which again, I'll put some of this in the description below, I don't think it's a bad idea to replace factory Optic screws with a better option again from McMaster Carr. That said, most of my optics, I just am using the factory screws. The final thing is you want to let this dry for 24 hours before you go shoot it. I know it's tempting. You just got your new optic. You want to throw it on your gun and go shoot. You really want to let it dry. If you start shooting it now, it's a lot more likely that the screws are going to loosen before the thread locker or the Vibratite really sets in. If you got to shoot it right away, I guess shoot it, but then torque everything down again and just give the screws another quick click here just to make sure that they stayed torqued up. If for any reason you have to remove a optic from the slide, you absolutely have to confirm 0. If you follow the process and you torque things down properly, you really shouldn't get any zero shift. These are generally pretty decent systems. Torque wrenches are accurate and they tend to hold their 0. I really haven't seen any significant shift when you remove an optic and torque it back down. However, you really don't want to leave that up to chance. You really want to be sure that it's good to go. The last thought you want to have going through your mind when you need to make a shot on a difficult target, a hostage taker shot or a longer distance shot or something like that is, man, I wonder if my optic is still zeroed. So that is the basics on how to mount up a optic to your handgun. It's not a difficult process. Just make sure that you have the right tools and you're careful, you follow the right procedures and you'll be good to go. I've had guns that, I mounted optics up a couple years ago and they're still going strong. Check your witness marks. You can hit it with your torque wrench every now and then just to make sure everything's tight. It's not a bad idea and you should be good to go. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments below. You can also get a hold of me via my email or through my website, which is criticalimpactgroup.com. Happy to answer any questions you have. Otherwise, if you're coming to class, look forward to seeing you. Let me know if you have any issues. Thanks.